My family called me their failure while I paid every single one of their bills. For 32 years, I was invisible to them until Thanksgiving night when I said 3 words that changed everything. They laughed at me during dinner. They made jokes about my boring life, my quiet existence. They had no idea that I had been keeping records for 10 years, and on Thanksgiving, when I finally spoke, they wished I had stayed silent forever. My family called me their failure, while I paid every bill. Then on Thanksgiving, I said 3 words. And those 3 words didn't just break the silence, they shattered the very foundation of the life we had all carefully constructed. They weren't words of anger, though I had a right to be angry. They weren't words of blame, though the blame was long overdue. They were 3 words that held a lifetime of quiet suffering, of unspoken truths, and of a final, terrible resolve. They were the words that, in the end, would set me free, even as they bound my family to a truth they had spent decades running from. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 32 years I was the ghost in my own home. Not a scary ghost, not one that rattled chains or haunted the living. No, I was the quiet ghost, the invisible one, the one you look right through, the one whose presence is acknowledged only when they are needed to fetch something, pay for something, or be blamed for something. I was the family failure. You see, I wasn't born into this role. I was assigned it. It was a gift given to me, wrapped in disappointment and tied with a ribbon of condescension. My older brother, Richard, was the golden child, a title he wore with the practiced ease of a king born to the throne. He was handsome, charming in a slimy sort of way, and possessed a confidence that was utterly unearned. He was the one who was going to be a success, a doctor, a titan of industry, something important. My younger sister, Sarah, was the darling princess. Beautiful, bubbly, and blessed with a talent for manipulative affection that would leave you feeling grateful for being used. She was the one with the perfect husband, the perfect children, and the perfect life that she would constantly document on social media, making sure we all knew just how perfect it was. And then there was me, the middle child, the one who was neither golden nor darling. I was the practical one, the quiet one, the one who got straight A's but somehow it was never good enough because it wasn't in the right subject. The one who chose to work as an administrative assistant at a local firm instead of pursuing a real career. I was the one who lived in a small, modest apartment because I was responsible. While Richard lived in a penthouse he couldn't afford, and Sarah had a mortgage on a house that was always in danger of foreclosure. To my parents, my success was invisible. My failures, however, were always front and center. I remember the day it all became crystal clear. I was 25. I had just received a promotion, a small one but a promotion nonetheless. I went to my parents' house for dinner, a rare invitation. I was so proud, my heart full of hope that this would finally be a moment they would see me. I walked in, and before I could even say a word, my father, a stern man with a permanent furrow in his brow, was looking at Richard. "Richard tells me he's up for a major promotion at his firm," my father announced, his voice filled with a pride that was never reserved for me. "He's a real go-getter, that one." I remember my smile faltering. The air in my lungs felt thin. I tried to interject, to tell them about my news, but it was like I wasn't even there. My mother was beaming at Sarah, who was showing her a new expensive handbag her husband had bought her. My father was clapping Richard on the back. And I was standing there, my little promotion in my pocket, feeling like a child again, invisible and insignificant. Finally, my mother turned to me. "Eleanor, dear, you look tired. Are you still at that office?" "Yes, Mom," I said quietly. "I actually just got a promotion. I'm now the office manager." She nodded, a look of vague disinterest on her face. "That's nice, dear, very practical." And just like that, she turned back to Sarah. The word practical was a poison dart dipped in disdain. It meant you were boring. It meant you were a failure. It meant you had settled. That was the moment the burden began to shift. It was subtle at first. A few years later, Richard needed a loan for a new car. He came to my parents, but they had just spent a fortune on a new patio. They were a little tight, they said. They turned to me. "Eleanor, you're so good with money," my mother said. "Could you help your brother out? He's in a bind, and you know he's working so hard. It's just a small loan." I knew it wasn't a small loan. I knew it would never be repaid. but I was the practical one. I was the one who had savings because I didn't live a lavish lifestyle. I gave them the money. It was the first of many. Then Sarah's husband lost his job. My mother called me, her voice frantic. Eleanor, the children need new clothes for school. Sarah is so distressed. Could you just help out? You don't have any children yourself. You have so much extra money. I didn't have extra money. I was saving for a house for my future, but I couldn't say no. I was a failure, but I was a failure who was always there to help. It became a pattern. My parents' roof needed fixing. Richard was behind on his credit card payments. Sarah's daughter needed braces, a new medical bill, a new mortgage payment. The requests never stopped, and they always came with a justification. Family helps family. We're all in this together. You're so much more fortunate than them. I wasn't more fortunate. I was just more responsible. I was the safety net. The understudy who never got the lead role, but was always there to save the show when the star fell ill. I paid for vacations, for holiday dinners, for birthday parties. I was the one who filled the gas tank in the family car. I was the one who bylaid Richard out of a legal issue that he promised would never happen again. I was the one who paid off Sarah's credit cards so she wouldn't have to tell her husband. And what did I get in return? Contempt. A constant, simmering contempt that painted me as the sad, lonely, boring spinster who had nothing better to do with her money but to give it away. If I ever mentioned the loans, my mother would sigh. Eleanor, don't be so transactional. We're a family, not a bank. If I ever expressed a complaint, my father would say, you've always been so dramatic, Eleanor. It's a small amount. Richard and Sarah are trying to build a life. You're just existing. Existing? That was what I was doing. I was a silent partner in their lives, a silent benefactor. My existence had become a function, a bank account that spoke only when spoken to, a shadow that followed them, cleaning up their messes and paying their debts. And I let it happen. I let them call me a failure. I let them treat me like I was nothing. Because somewhere, deep down, I believed them. I had internalized their voices. The practical one, the one who never took a risk, the failure. The years blurred together in a haze of endless giving. Each request was presented as an emergency, a crisis that only I could solve. And each time I opened my wallet, I felt a tiny piece of myself disappear. I stopped buying new clothes for myself. I stopped going out with friends because I couldn't afford it. I stopped dreaming about my future because all my dreams had been mortgaged to pay for theirs. My apartment remained small and sparsely furnished while their homes grew more extravagant. My car was 10 years old while Richard traded in his every 2 years. I ate simple meals while they dined at expensive restaurants. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the way they made me feel small. Every family gathering was an exercise in subtle cruelty. Richard would talk about his successes while looking at me with pity. Sarah would post family photos on social media, carefully cropping me out or positioning me in the background. My mother would introduce me to her friends as our Eleanor, who works in an office, as if that was something to be ashamed of. My father would ask me when I was going to do something with my life, completely ignoring the fact that I was the only one in the family who had actually achieved anything. I remember one Christmas particularly vividly. I had given each of them generous gifts, as I always did. Richard got a new briefcase. Sarah got a designer handbag. My parents got a weekend getaway package. What did I get? A set of kitchen towels from my mother, a cheap candle from Sarah, a book on finding your passion from Richard, and from my father, nothing. He had forgotten. When I asked about it, he shrugged and said, I figured you wouldn't mind. You're so practical. Practical, the word haunted me. It was their code for unimportant, for forgettable, for not worthy of effort. I had become so useful that I had become invisible. They had turned my generosity into a weapon, using it to keep me in my place. The more I gave, the more they took, and the less they respected me. I started keeping records, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining it, that I really was giving them everything while they gave me nothing. I kept a spreadsheet. Every loan, every gift, every bill I paid. I kept copies of checks. I kept bank statements. I kept emails. I kept voicemails. I created a paper trail of my own destruction. At first, I told myself it was for tax purposes. Then I told myself it was for my own peace of mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was building a case. Not against them, but against the version of myself that believed I deserved this treatment. I was documenting my own worth, proving to myself that I mattered, that my contributions were real and significant even if nobody acknowledged them. The spreadsheet grew. Year after year, the numbers climbed. By the time I was 32, the total was staggering. I had given them over $200,000, and that didn't include the smaller gifts, the groceries, the gas money, the spontaneous emergencies. It didn't include the time I had spent, the energy, the emotional labor. It didn't include the pieces of my soul that I had handed over with each transaction. I remember the night before that Thanksgiving. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, going through my records one more time. I had been invited to dinner at my parents' house, as usual. My mother had called to remind me to bring the cranberry sauce and to come early to help with the potatoes. She had also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Richard was going through a rough patch and might need some financial assistance. Sarah's husband had lost another job. My father's investments had underperformed. The usual litany of crises. I stared at my spreadsheet. The numbers blurred before my eyes. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. The vacations I never took. The clothes I never bought. The house I never owned. The retirement fund that was virtually non-existent. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up worrying about their problems while they slept peacefully in their comfortable beds. I thought about all the times I had been made to feel like a failure while I was literally holding their lives together. And I thought about those 3 words. I am done. I had said them to myself many times before, always in moments of frustration, always followed by guilt and capitulation. But that night, something was different. That night, I meant them. I could feel it in my bones. A shift had occurred, a tectonic movement deep within my psyche. The weight of 32 years of mistreatment had finally reached its breaking point. I was going to say those words out loud. I was going to look them in the eye and tell them the truth, and I was going to walk away. It was Thanksgiving, the year I was 32, the year everything changed. The event was, as always, at my parents' house. I was told to be there by noon to help with the preparations. I arrived at 11:45, a quivering bundle of obedience, carrying a bag of groceries that my mother had asked me to pick up. The house was already filled with the cacophony of family. Richard was in the living room, his voice booming about his latest business venture, something vague and likely doomed to fail. Sarah was in the kitchen with my mother, and I could hear their voices, a symphony of complaints and petty gossip. My mother opened the door. She looked me up and down, her lips slightly curled. "Eleanor, you're here. Good. The potatoes need to be peeled, and I need you to set the table. Your sister is too busy with the kids." I nodded, my shoulders already slumped, a familiar weight settling on them. I walked into the kitchen, past my mother who was already turning back to Sarah. As I was saying, dear, it was just a disaster. The nanny was absolutely useless. Sarah looked at me and gave a little smile. "Oh, Elle, you look so pale. Are you sick? You really should take better care of yourself. It's important to have a little sparkle." "You're right, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "I'll work on my sparkle." I began peeling potatoes, my hands moving mechanically. I was a ghost again. But this time, I was a ghost with a plan. While I peeled and chopped and set the table, I was rehearsing. Not what I would say, but how I would feel. I was preparing myself for the confrontation that was coming. I was steeling myself against the guilt, the manipulation, the crocodile tears that I knew would follow. I had been through this before, but never like this. This time, I would not back down. The hours crawled by. Richard arrived with his latest girlfriend, a vapid woman who spent the entire time on her phone. Sarah's children ran through the house, screaming and knocking things over, while their parents did nothing to control them. My father sat in his recliner, watching football and drinking beer, occasionally shouting at the players on the screen as if they could hear him. My mother fluttered around the kitchen, barking orders at me while pretending to be the gracious hostess. I observed them all with new eyes. I saw Richard for what he was, a charming failure who had coasted through life on his good looks and ability to manipulate others. I saw Sarah for what she was, a desperate narcissist who needed constant validation to feel alive. I saw my father for what he was, a bitter old man who had never achieved anything and was jealous of anyone who tried. I saw my mother for what she was, a master manipulator who had turned emotional abuse into an art form. And I saw myself for what I was, a victim, a willing victim, yes, but a victim nonetheless. I had allowed them to treat me this way. I had given them the power to define me. I had handed over my self-worth on a silver platter and begged them to validate it. But that was about to change. I was taking my power back. Hours later, the table was set. A beautiful spread. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, cranberry sauce. I had helped pay for all of it. The smell was rich and warm, but it did nothing to thaw the ice in my heart. We all took our seats. The usual dynamics were in place. Richard at the head of the table, next to my father. Sarah and her husband, Mark, on one side, with their two perfectly groomed children, Lily and Thomas. I was seated at the other end, the forgotten end, next to my mother. The food was passed around. The conversation flowed in its typical channels. Richard talked about a potential merger. My father nodded approvingly. Sarah talked about her upcoming trip to Europe. My mother listened with starry-eyed admiration. Mark, who had a new job I'd likely paid for in some roundabout way, was happy to be part of the success story. I watched them all, my hands folded in my lap. I hadn't touched my food. I couldn't eat. The anticipation was building inside me, a pressure that was almost unbearable. I kept waiting for the right moment, the perfect opening. But as the meal progressed, I realized there would be no perfect moment. There would only be this moment, and I would have to seize it. My father cleared his throat, a signal for a toast. He raised his glass of expensive wine. To family, he said, his eyes sweeping over the table. And to success. To Richard, our future captain of industry. To Sarah, the heart of this family. To the future, and to the wonderful life we have all built together. It was a speech I had heard 100 times, just with different words. It was a speech that always conveniently forgot me. I was an afterthought. I was the absence in the room. I was the empty space on the family tree. Richard raised his glass, a smug grin on his face. To the Vance legacy, he declared. He looked at me, a flicker of his usual condescension in his eyes, and to a leaner who's, well, always here. The table laughed, a light, tinkling family laugh. My mother chuckled. Sarah giggled. My father gave a half-smile. It was a joke at my expense, a reference to my unremarkable life, a reminder that I was just the boring, dependable sister who existed on the periphery of their glorious lives. They laughed, and in that moment something inside me snapped. Not a loud, physical snap like a breaking bone. It was a quiet, internal fracture. A final crack in a wall that had been slowly crumbling for years. The laughter was the final blow, the nail in the coffin of my old self. I saw all of it, suddenly, with a terrifying clarity. I saw Richard's new watch, the one I had probably indirectly paid for. I saw Sarah's new diamond earrings, another gift from their generous husband, a husband who couldn't afford his own mortgage. I saw the expensive food, the renovations on the house, all of it. All of it was built on my life, on my quiet sacrifice, and they were laughing at me. My eyes fell on my mother's hand. It rested on the table, casual and elegant. The hand that had signed the request for the very money that had paid for the turkey we were eating. I saw my father's smug smile, the one he wore whenever he talked about his successful children. He was a failure himself, a man who had coasted through life on a mediocre salary and a mountain of debt, but he had found a way to elevate himself in the reflected glory of his children. Children who were only successful because they had a silent, invisible partner financing their delusions. I had paid every bill, every school fee, every car repair, every mortgage payment when they were short, every vacation, every late fee. Every ounce of their comfort had been subsidized by my hard work, my late nights, my empty savings account. And they called me a failure. The laughter died down. Everyone was looking at me. Maybe my silence was too long. Maybe my face was too pale. My mother, the queen of manufactured concern, looked at me. "Eleanor, dear, are you all right? You haven't said a word. You always are so quiet." My father scoffed. "Leave her alone, Margaret. She's just being her usual self. She's probably thinking about her spreadsheets or something. He said it with a sneer, as if being a responsible adult was the worst possible fate. I looked at him, I looked at all of them, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was something far more dangerous. I was resolved. I pushed my chair back. It scraped against the floor with a loud, grating sound that cut through the self-satisfied chatter. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. They all looked at me with various shades of surprise and irritation. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" my mother asked, her voice a little high. "We haven't even had dessert yet." I took a deep breath. It was time to stop being a ghost, time to start being a reckoning. I looked at each of them slowly, deliberately. I saw my father, the patriarch who had never provided for his family. I saw my mother, the matriarch who had never protected her daughter. I saw Richard, the golden boy who had never earned a penny. I saw Sarah, the princess who had never faced a consequence. I saw their children, already being molded into the same entitled, arrogant, ungrateful monsters. And then I opened my mouth. I felt a strange calm, a sense of rightness that I had never felt before. My voice, when it came, was not the quiet, timid voice they were used to. It was clear. It was steady. It was full of a power I didn't know I possessed. The 3 words that fell from my lips were like rocks thrown into a still pond, sending out ripples of shock and confusion. I am done. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence that followed was a living thing, pulsing and expanding. My mother's fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto her plate. My father's smile had frozen on his face, a grotesque mask of confusion. Richard's smugness had vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. Sarah looked at me as if I had sprouted a second head. "Done with what?" my father finally managed to ask, his voice a low growl. He didn't like it when things didn't go his way. "Done with dinner? Sit down, Eleanor. You're being dramatic." "Done," I repeated, my voice gaining strength, "with being a ghost in your family. Done with being your failure. Done with being your bank. Done with being invisible." My mother's face went pale. "Eleanor, what are you talking about? You've been drinking." "I haven't touched a drop, Mother," I said, my voice laced with a new, cold disdain. "I'm perfectly sober. For the first time in 32 years, I am perfectly, utterly sober." Sarah let out a nervous giggle. "Oh, Elle, you're always so silly. You're just tired. Why don't you go and lie down?" "It's okay, Annalena," Lily, my niece, piped up, her voice sweet and innocent, echoing the condescension she'd learned from her mother. "We can do your chores." Her innocent cruelty was the final nail in the coffin. I looked at the child, her future already mapped out for her. A future of taking, of entitlement, of looking down on those who were practical and dependable. "Chores," I whispered, looking from my mother to my father to Richard and Sarah. "That's what you think I'm good for, chores." "You're being ridiculous," my father snapped, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You have a place in this family, Eleanor. You are a Vance. We have a legacy. You have a duty." "Duty?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh that felt foreign in my own throat. "What legacy? A legacy of debt? A legacy of irresponsibility? A legacy of taking and never, ever giving back? I have been paying for your lives for years. Years I paid for Richard's car. I paid for Sarah's mortgage. I paid for the new roof on this house. I paid for the braces on Lily's teeth. I paid for your vacations. I paid for everything. Every single thing, while you told me I was a failure, while you all laughed at me." I turned to Richard. "You, with your $1 million ideas and your $0 bank account. You have never held a steady job for more than 2 years. And every time you crash and burn, who is there to pick up the pieces? Me. I am the one who pays your bills." Richard's face was ashen. That's not true. That's not how it was." "It's the only way it was," I shot back. "Look at your watch, your new watch. It's a Rolex. You told me you got it as a bonus. But your company didn't give you a bonus, did they, Richard? You bought it on a credit card. I saw the statement. You had me pay it. Because you're just a big, fabulous failure who needs his little sister to be his sugar mommy." I turned to Sarah, whose eyes were wide with horror. "And you, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, with the perfect house that you were about to lose. I paid off your mortgage, Sarah. The bank was going to foreclose. Your husband had no idea, did he? I gave you the money. I kept your little secret. And in return, you call me a failure. You make jokes about my life, about my lack of sparkle. You teach your precious children to treat me like a servant. Mark, Sarah's husband, was staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Sarah, is this true? The mortgage? You said you got a loan. She stammered, it was just a small thing, Mark. I didn't want to bother you. It was just a temporary fix. A temporary fix I paid for, I said, my voice dripping with venom. All of it, for years, and what did I get? I got called a failure. I got to be the invisible one, the one you all look right through. I finally turned to my parents. My mother was clutching her pearls. My father looked like he was about to have a heart attack. And you too, I said, my voice softening, but not in a kind way. It was a quiet, terrible sadness. You started all of this. You built this world, this family, on the foundation of my insignificance. You made me the failure. You molded me into the dependable one who would just take it, and I did. I was so desperate for your approval, for your love. I thought if I could just help enough, give enough, you'd finally see me. You'd finally love me. But you don't love me. You love what I do for you. My mother started crying, a messy, frantic sob. Eleanor, how can you say that? We love you, you're our daughter. No, Mother, I said, shaking my head. You love a ghost. You love a bank account. You love a safety net. You've never loved me. You don't even know me. You only see me when you need something. Enough, my father roared, slamming his fist on the table. Glasses rattled, and a bowl of cranberry sauce tipped over, staining the white tablecloth a deep, bloody red. You will not speak to your mother like that. We are your family. You owe us everything. I stared at him. He was a pathetic, angry old man, clinging to an authority he had long since forfeited. Owe you? I owe you nothing. I have given you everything I had. My time, my money, my soul, I have nothing left to give. I am empty. I reached into my purse. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the emotions I was finally releasing. I pulled out a stack of papers, neatly clipped together. These, I announced, holding them up, are records. For the last 10 years, every single payment I made, every loan, every bill I paid, every single thing I subsidized. Copies of the checks, the bank transfers, the credit card statements. I have it all. I was practical, remember. I kept meticulous records. The room was silent. I saw the horror dawn on their faces. This wasn't just an emotional outburst. This was a threat, a legal, very real threat. This family's dirty little secret, I said, letting the papers rustle in my hand. You can't hide from it anymore. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You built your lives on my back, and now I am telling you the ride is over. I am done. I am done being your fallback plan. I am done being your failure. I am taking my life back. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. What are you going to do, Eleanor? Please, we're family. We can work this out. There is nothing to work out, I said, my voice final. I am going to walk out that door. I am going to go back to my apartment. And tomorrow, I'm going to call a lawyer. I'm going to demand every single penny back, every single one. And I am going to walk away from all of you. I looked at Richard. You'll have to sell your penthouse, brother, and the car, and the watch. You'll have to get a real job. I looked at Sarah. You'll have to tell Mark the truth. You'll have to live within your means. I looked at my parents. And you'll have to sell this house. The big, beautiful house that I paid for. You'll have to live in a real world. For the first time in your lives, you'll have to face consequences. I walked toward the door. My heart was pounding, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I was walking out of a prison, leaving behind a lifetime of invisible chains. Wait, my father called out, his voice cracking. Eleanor, please, you can't do this. We're a family. I turned back to look at them one last time, a gallery of guilt and greed and disbelief. I saw their faces, distorted by shock and fear. The golden boy was a fraud. The darling princess was a liar. The powerful patriarch was a weakling. The devoted matriarch was a manipulator. Family, I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it on my tongue. You don't know what that word means. You never have. To you, family is a resource to be exploited. I've finally figured that out, and I'm done being your resource. I pulled the door open. The cold November air hit my face, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic warmth of the house. I walked out, leaving behind the shambles of my family, leaving behind the Thanksgiving dinner that would never be finished, leaving behind a silence that would echo in their ears for years to come. I walked to my car, my footsteps echoing in the quiet street. I got in, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The ghosts I had left behind were their problem now. For the first time in my life, I was free. I was no longer the failure. I was the one who held all the power. I was the one who had the proof. I was the one who had walked away. It was a strange, thrilling, terrifying feeling. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The silence from my family was deafening at first. Then came the calls. My mother, tearful and pleading. My father, angry and demanding. Richard, trying to be charming and manipulative. Sarah, playing the victim. I ignored them all. I let them go to voicemail, and I saved every single message. I was building my case. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright. She looked at my records, her eyes widening slightly. "Eleanor," she said, "this is substantial. You've essentially been funding their entire lives. The law is on your side, especially with the documentation you have. This is an open and shut case." We sent them a letter, a formal demand letter. I didn't see their faces when they received it, but I could imagine the shock, the fear, the rage. My father called, his voice a broken roar. "You've done this. You've destroyed this family. Your mother is in the hospital. She's having a breakdown. Is this what you wanted?" It wasn't what I wanted. I wanted love. I wanted acceptance. I wanted to be seen. But I had learned the hard way that I wasn't going to get it from them. I had to get it for myself. I hung up on him. It was easier than I thought. The battle was not easy. There were counter-arguments, offers for mediation, veiled threats of a media scandal. But I stood firm, my resolve strengthened by every bitter memory, every dismissive comment, every laugh at my expense. I was no longer the family failure. I was the family reckoning. The lawyer handled the details. She was brilliant. She was my sword and my shield. And after months of legal wrangling, the settlements were made. Richard sold his car and his watch. Sarah's husband left her when he found out about the years of deception. They sold the house. My parents were forced to downsize to a small, modest apartment. The money was paid back, every single penny. I didn't spend it. I invested it. I bought a small house. I started a college fund for myself. For the first time in my life, I was planning for my own future. The family was shattered. They were scattered. Richard moved to a different state to escape his mounting shame. Sarah was a single mother, struggling with a part-time job and the bitter truth of her failure. My parents were alone, living a life of quiet, impoverished regret. The Great Vance legacy was a house of cards that had finally collapsed, and I was the wind that had blown it down. But what about me? Did I feel triumphant? Did I feel avenged? Sometimes. There was a deep satisfaction in knowing that I had finally been heard, that I had finally made them pay for what they had done to me. But there was also a profound sadness. I had lost my family. Even a terrible, toxic family is still a family. The loneliness was a cold, familiar bedfellow. I started going to therapy. I started talking about the years of emotional abuse, the constant gaslighting, the systematic erosion of my self-worth. It was hard. Unearthing the trauma was like picking at a scab that had never been allowed to heal. But slowly, inch by painful inch, I started to heal. My therapist, Dr. Chen, was patient and kind. She helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't my fault. She helped me see that I had been conditioned from childhood to believe that my value was tied to what I could provide for others. She helped me recognize the patterns of manipulation and control that had kept me trapped for so long. "It's not selfish to protect yourself, Eleanor," she would say. "It's not selfish to have boundaries. It's not selfish to prioritize your own well-being. Your family taught you that it was, but they were wrong." I started to believe her. Slowly, painfully, I started to believe that I deserved better. I started to believe that I was worthy of love and respect, not because of what I could give, but simply because I existed. It was a revolutionary concept, one that I had never been allowed to entertain. I started to build a new life. I found a new job, one that paid better and valued my skills. I started taking classes at the community college, pursuing the degree I had always wanted but never thought I could afford. I started making friends, real friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. The money I got back from my family became my freedom fund. I used it to buy a small house, a cozy bungalow with a garden. I used it to pay for my education. I used it to travel, to see the world that I had always been too busy funding their lives to experience. I used it to invest in my future, a future that was finally, truly mine. Years passed. I built a new life, a successful life, not in the flashy, superficial way my family had valued, but a life of quiet purpose. I had a good job, a comfortable home, and a few close friends who actually saw me. I found joy in simple things: reading a book, gardening, taking a walk. The things that had once been considered boring and practical were now my most precious pleasures. The 3 words I had spoken on that Thanksgiving day had changed everything. I am done. They were not a cry for help or a plea for them to change. They were a declaration of war, a war against the ghost I had been, a war for the soul I was reclaiming. I thought about them often, my family, not with the desperate longing I once felt, but with a kind of detached curiosity. I wondered if they ever thought about me. I wondered if they understood what they had lost. I wondered if they had learned anything from the experience. I heard things through the grapevine. Richard had tried to start another business, but it had failed. He was living with a friend, struggling to make ends meet. Sarah had remarried briefly, but it hadn't lasted. She was raising her children alone, working 2 jobs to support them. My mother had become something of a recluse, rarely leaving her apartment. My father had passed away, a bitter and broken man. I didn't feel sorry for them, not really. I had spent too many years feeling sorry for them to my own detriment, but I didn't feel vengeful either. I just felt separate. They were no longer a part of my story. They were characters in my past, lessons I had learned, wounds that had healed. One evening, years after that fateful Thanksgiving, I got a call. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious. It was my mother. Her voice was different. It was small, fragile, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Alina," she said, it's your mother." I was silent for a moment. The old, familiar guilt tried to surface, tried to make me feel sorry for her, but I pushed it down. I had worked too hard to let it back in. "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was calm. "How are you?" She hesitated. I'm not well, Alina. Your father passed away last year. Did you know?" "No," I said. "I didn't." A part of me felt a pang, but another part of me felt nothing. He was a stranger to me. He had always been a stranger. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was a little. I wanted to call you," she said, her voice cracking. "I know you hate us. I know you have every right to, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. We were wrong, Alina, so wrong." The apology I had waited a lifetime for. It was late. It was far too late. It didn't change the past. It didn't erase the pain. But as I listened to her faltering words, I realized something. I didn't need her apology anymore. The validation I had craved for so long had to come from within, and it finally did. "Thank you for saying that, Mother," I said. "I appreciate it." Could we see each other?" she asked, her voice full of desperate hope. I thought about it. The idea of seeing her, of opening that door even a crack, sent a tremor of anxiety through me. "I don't think that would be wise," I said. "Not yet, perhaps not ever. I've spent the last few years building a new life. I can't let the old one tear it down." "I understand," she whispered. "I do, I miss you." I didn't respond. I couldn't say I missed her, because I didn't. I missed the idea of a mother who had never existed. I missed the family I had always wished for. "Goodbye, Mother," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Goodbye, Alina," she said. I hung up. I sat in the quiet of my living room, looking at the world outside my window. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the sky. I took a deep breath. The weight of the past was still there, a part of my history I would never be able to fully escape. But it was no longer a chain around my neck. It was just a story. My story. A story about a girl who was called a failure until she realized she was the only success in her family. A story about a girl who was invisible until she spoke 3 words that shattered the illusion. The 3 words that were not just a sentence, but a liberation. The 3 words that were the end of one story and the beginning of another. The 3 words that were the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I am done. I am done being invisible. I am done being taken for granted. I am done being the family failure. I am done paying for everyone else's life while neglecting my own. I am done seeking validation from people who are incapable of giving it. I am done being a ghost in my own life. I am done. And now I am finally free.